We've all heard the aphorism, the journey is better than the destination. And at first glance, you may think that that makes sense. However, I gotta do this because I can't reach it. However, I recently finished 2 TV shows. Sorry, that's the phrase you hear everybody say, the journey is better than the destination. I recently finished 2 TV shows, Game of Thrones and Star Wars The Acolyte, and they took that stupid phrase, ripped it into shreds, peed on it, ran it through a swimming pool filtration system and sent it to space, where it met with the timely demise from overexposure to the sun. So the question is the journey really more important than the destination? No. But that's why my thesis is this: the journey matters as much as the destination. Groundbreaking, I know. So, before we go any further into this presentation, I want you to keep 3 things in mind. 1, stories are the most important medium humans have to communicate, and the art of storytelling should be valued and studied. 2, your time is as valuable as it is limited, which means it should be spent wisely. So 3, you should know what makes a good story and shouldn't waste your time on bad stories. So, that brings me to the first question. Can a bad ending ruin a story? Even if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, you probably have heard about how bad the ending was to that TV show, and let me tell you, you were not lied to. It really is terrible. I watched 8 seasons of generally decent dialogue, and there was way too much sexual content, which ruined the show for me personally, and the payoff at the end was as lame as it was abrupt. But throughout all of those 8 seasons, there were some bright spots, some interesting concepts, some characters I got emotionally invested in, beautiful visuals, and some meaningful moments, which then got me thinking of the just wait for the good part crowd. We all know these people that say, hey, just hold on, hold your horses and wait till it gets good. And that brings me to the question of how long is it reasonable to wait? 1 season, 3 books, 10 hours of gameplay? How good does the payoff have to be to make a slog of uninteresting drivel actually worth the story that you get at the very end? How does it compensate you for your time? Now, you notice the point of all these questions sort of indicates that the important part is the conclusion, that all you're waiting for through reading or watching or playing or whatever, that the conclusion is the only part of this question that matters. But let me give you an example. We have Divergent. You ever heard of 9/11? Yeah, this shows the reason why that happened. You guys probably heard me talk about this at least a fair few times, but the first book starts off really, really well until the main character, whose name I can't even remember, meets the love interest 4, and then it literally crashes into those really 2 tall towers in New York, and it burns for 2.5 books. So, that brings me to this question. Can a bad ending ruin a story? Now, in my opinion, a bad ending doesn't ruin a story, but it does make it feel purposeless and or meaningless when you've invested your time into a story, especially if you've been promised something wonderful by the end of it. A terrible payout can be really, really disappointing. So, that brings me back to my original point. The journey matters as much as the destination. And I guess a little subtext there would be the best stories, and there's a typo here, but the best stories are the ones that are captivating from beginning to end. So let's look at some examples. Boom, everybody saw this coming. Of course, this would be my first one. Not only are each of the individual books engaging from beginning to end, but the entire series, read in chronological order, frick you, Justice, tells an incredible story that is not only creative and engaging, but meaningful and impactful. You got engaging from start to finish, perfectly placed epic, wonderful and interesting characters, inspiring and meaningful stories. Get to see Mr. Tumnus's nipple or read about it. I mean, he doesn't wear shirts, so you know. And at the very end there, frick you, Justice. Books ought to be read in chronological order. Next, we have The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. So you start the game, and you don't know anything about anything, aside from the fact that you, as Link, need to defeat Ganon. 80 hours later, you've scaled mountains, tamed wild horses, defeated bosses, learned a perfect parry, discovered hidden secrets. you found beautiful vistas, listened to one of the most incredible soundtracks of all time, and you've probably eaten more dubious food than you really want to admit. Next, we have Star Wars The Clone Wars. Probably will go down as the GOAT of all TV shows, in my opinion. Every single episode is a slapper. You have the Mandalorian arc, the Box arc, the Siege of Geonosis, the Maul arc, the underwater episodes, and who could forget that ending? Maul trying to convince Ahsoka to go with him to defeat the Emperor. Every time I see a badass edit on Instagram of that little interaction, it gives me the chills. Perfect ending, greatest show of all time.
Great edits.
Yeah.
Fantastic edits. Then you have what we were just talking about, Blade Runner 2049. What a cinematic masterpiece. If you haven't seen it, you should absolutely see it. Agent K's character arc, the hidden references, the visuals, the sound design, it's perfect. You look lonely, I can fix that.
Ooh.
So,
Yeah.
that brings me to the conclusion. Stories that are captivating all the way through. The thing about these stories, or the ones that I mentioned, is that they are captivating all the way through. They don't ask you to choose between the journey and the destination. They provide worthwhile versions of both. They also reward your emotional investment with an interesting or fascinating or inspiring ending. So, what are some steps that you can take to make any of this information useful to you? And first off, I completely understand that you won't know a story is worth it until you've experienced it. Sometimes you can rely on friends or family or people online or whatever to help tell you if you like option A, that you might like option B. But then some of those people might like Eragon, frick you justice. It is totally possible, however, that you come across a story that nobody has heard. And so here are some steps for you to go through that story to see if finishing the story is worth your time. First off is, does the story give me any reasons to care early on? Is there an interesting question or mystery? A compelling character or world? A promise of emotional, thematic, or experiential payoff that is worth waiting for? Next, does this story respect my emotional investment, and or do I have any emotional investment in the story? Do the character choices feel consistent? Is there progress being made in the story? Is there new information being presented that adds to the story, not just to the length of the story? Third, as I near the end of the story, do I understand what kind of ending the story is leading up to? Do I have questions that are likely to be answered? Do I like the tone the story is taking? Do I have an idea of what would be an appropriate ending to the story? Last, once the story's over, do I feel like the ending gave meaning to the journey? Was the story coherent? Do the events in the beginning and middle of the story feel purposeful at the end of it? Or was my emotional investment respected, challenged, or thoughtfully redirected? So your feelings about a story 6 days or even 6 months later after you complete it can tell you a lot about how you really think of the contents. Finding yourself thinking about it, wanting to re-experience it, or wanting to clarify details is a really good indicator if the impact of the story had on you. If you have no thoughts, or if you feel like the story wasted your time, then it probably isn't in your best interest to read more from the author, or to continue the series, or even maybe finish the game. Your time is precious. Don't waste it on Eragon. Frick you justice. The end.